of Behar deals with one of the great historical incidents that's mentioned in the Novi Yirmiyahu. Yirmiyahu, the prophet, was put into prison by the king, Tzidkiyahu, because of the fact that he prophesied negatively regarding the destruction of the city of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple. And it engendered a defeatist attitude amongst the people, and the king didn't want that to happen. So the king solved the problem by arresting the Novi and putting him in the dungeon, which was then located in the Chatzer HaMatara, which is a dungeon that still exists today in East Jerusalem. It's a very large cave. I can take you to see it. The Arabs sell bananas there in their respect for historic sites. And it's a very, very deep, dark cave, and that was the prison for political prisoners. And the Novi Yirmiyahu was a political prisoner because of the fact that he preached against the policies of the government. The government made war. The government somehow felt that they would be able to be successful against the imperial might of Bavel. And the Navi told them that it was foolhardy and that only Jews would die thereby, and that they should accept the fact that the city would be destroyed and they would go into exile. So the Navi was imprisoned for that. So the Haftorah begins the connection of the Haftorah to the Parsha because the Parsha speaks about land in the land of Israel and the halach of redeeming land in the land of Israel. If one sold property in a city, so then for a period of a year one had a right to redeem the property. In other words, if you sold within the year, you could come back and buy it back for approximately the same price. And if you sold property, generally fields, so then that was sold until the Yovel, until the Jubilee year, and then the property reverted back. And there were rights to redeem within the Yovel. You could redeem your property whenever you wanted to. The thrust of the property ownership of the Torah was not to allow a small group of people to control all the land. And therefore, there were severe limitations put upon these types of sales and other ventures such as this. Vayomer Yirmiyahu, the prophet said, Hoya Dvar Hashem Elai Lemor. He's sitting in the dungeon, and the vision of God appears to him. God comes to tell him news. It's very good that, that he has God, so he's not lonely, right? He's sitting in jail, and God comes to talk to him. Hine Chanamel ben Shalom Dodcha Boi Lecha Lemor. I want you to know you're going to have a visitor. There will be a day. He's coming. Your uncle. It's not really an uncle. It's Shalom was the uncle, and Chanamel is the cousin. Shalom and Chilkiyahu was the father of Yirmiyahu, were brothers. So Yirmiyahu is the son of Chilkiyahu, brother one, and Chanamel is the brother of Shalom, brother two. So they are first cousins. Bo Elecha Lemor, and he's going to come to you with a proposition. Kanei lecho esodi asher ba'anosos. Buy my field that is in the village of Anosos. The village of Anosos is north of Yerushalayim. That's the hometown of Yirmiyahu Hanavi. It's in the part of the property that belonged to the tribe of Binyamin. Today, in the village of Anatot, and then there's an Arab name which is close to it, there is a small airfield which services Yerushalayim, Piper Cubs, things such as that. That's the area where the Novi Yirmiyahu lived. So So he said, listen, I am forced to sell. I don't have money. And you are my closest relative, so therefore I sell to you. You have the first right, so to speak, the first right of refusal. You have the mitzvah, right? What does he mean? He means, if I would sell the property to a stranger, then you would have the right to come and redeem it, because we want to, you're allowed to keep the property in the family, so you could come and buy it from the stranger, force him to sell it to you. So instead of my selling to a stranger and you're going out to redeem, I'm coming to you first. Do you want to buy or don't you? Because it says in this, in the pasuk here in Behar, that if a Jew becomes poor and he is forced to sell his property because of his poverty, then his relatives are obliged to redeem the property in order to keep it in the family, in order to keep it in the tribe, in order to prevent, again, the acquisition of a great deal of property by a small number of individuals. So there was a mitzvah on the relatives to redeem the property. So he told him, he said, you would have to redeem it anyway, so come buy it. I need the money now. Now you have to remember again that Yirmiyahu is sitting in jail because he said that the city is going to be destroyed and the Jews are going to go into exile. And this guy comes with a proposition to buy land now. Hardly a tempting business proposition. And we all know that Jews are great realtors. So why should he make such a proposition? So God tells him, this your cousin's going to come, and this is what he's going to tell you. As the word of God said, the short period of time, as God said he would come, all of a sudden one day I have a visitor in jail. Hanamel ben Dodi, my cousin. Kidvar Hashem, as God had predicted, as God had told me. And he came into the dungeon, into the jail. So the Meforshim say that itself was a rare relaxation of the rules to allow the political prisoners to have visitors. And he said to me, I want you to please buy my field. Please do me a favor. Asher be'eretz Binyamin. That is in the land of Binyamin. He gave him the lot number, the land description, the legal description of the property. Because you're the closest relative. That's what Mishpat HaYerusha means. If everyone died in the family, you would inherit. You're the one that's next in line. Because if he died, he apparently did not have children. So if he died, then the property goes up to his father. If his father is dead, it goes across to the brother. The brother was the father of Yirmiyahu. If the father of Yirmiyahu was dead, then it goes down to Yirmiyahu. So that's what he told him. He said, everybody else is dead. And if I would die now, then you would be the Yeresh. You are the next in line to be the heir. It's your property. And therefore you have the right of redemption. You're the next in line. You have to redeem. I'm going broke. They're going to take it away from the mortgage. So you have to redeem. K'neirach, buy it from me. Take it off my hands. And I know then Kidvar Hashem hu. Very cryptic. What do you mean then he knew? He knew that God spoke to him before. See, he said, I mean, this is the insight of the Tanakh. This guy, Hanamel, doesn't know that he's being written down in the book forever. Yeah, Hanamel came to unload on his dumb cousin who's sitting in jail a piece of worthless property. That's his cheshbon. That's the seller. But I knew, Yirmiyahu says, that that's not the story here. Kidvar Hashemu. This is a fulfillment of the word of God. God is using this as an example for a prophecy which will last for the Jewish people throughout all their ages, wherever they're at, that the Jewish people should never lose faith in their return to their homeland and to the fact that Eretz Yisrael will belong to them. That's what God sent Hanamel. But Hanamel doesn't know he's going on such a mission. In the Tanakh, it is always that way. That the Tanakh describes to us both sides, how the human beings see the story and how God sees the story. And that really is meant to teach us a lot about life. We only see things in our limited fashion. So we never go to do a great thing. All right? Shaul HaMelech went to look for lost donkeys. He doesn't know he's going to be the king. David is called into a room to meet an old man that wants to look over the brothers. He doesn't know he's going to be appointed the king. Moshe is working for his father-in-law and he chases the sheep that got lost. He's not looking for God. He's not looking for the burning bush. None of us ever look for our fate. We never know why we're doing the things, even though we can explain to you everything that we're doing. It makes perfect logic, right? I always tell the guys in yeshiva, my wife married a lawyer. The way life works is, what does God say? How does he look at it? What happened here? And that's what the Navi says, well, Adon, I knew, because I'm in on the story, right? God tipped me. I also would have thought if God wouldn't have clued me in, I would say, my Meshuggah cousin, he thinks I'm an idiot. Comes to unload a piece of worthless property in the middle of the siege, and I'm sitting in jail. That would have been my reaction, the Navi says, except that God clued me in. God said he's coming to sell, buy. It's a good deal for you. You buy it. Well, Ada, I knew Kidvar Hashemu. That's the secret of life. That's the secret of the Tanakh. There's a great tape by Rabbi Wein, tape number 60A, which is called How to View History Through the Eyes of the Tanakh. And that really is the Jewish viewpoint of life. If you see things that way, then not only does life make more sense, even though we would say that it's confusing, but it's less confusing. It allows the tremendous variety of life to be enjoyed by us. We realize we're participants in a great story, right? So we wait to see what the plot brings. Otherwise, we're all puny, petty people that, nothing means anything. No one knows where he goes and what he does and whom he meets and what purpose. God has a different scenario than anyone else. So the Navi says, I said, sure, we got to do it. Poor guy is frustrated because he's going to pay him the full price that he asked. That's the worst punishment that a buyer can inflict upon a seller, is to pay the exact price. I always have my great story that I tell about my balabatim in Miami Beach, that when we went, we were going to build the shul. I was there 1 year. Miami Beach, our shul in Miami Beach was the best of all worlds. It had a Hungarian balabatim and a Lithuanian rabbi. That's the perfect combination. If it's reversed, you got problems. But this way it's perfect. And these guys were real good businessmen. But I mean, they were good businessmen. They really knew how to do things. So we had a lease. When I came, we were in a storefront. There was 2 stores. And we had a lease on the 2 stores that had about 6 or 7 years to go on the lease. I think 7 years to go on the lease. And the entire block was purchased by, then it was Food Fair, by Pantry Pride, by the supermarket. And they were going to wreck the block and make a parking lot. They were building a big supermarket. And this was going to be the parking lot. So they bought out everybody on the block. And they bought out the guy that owned our 2 stores. And we were the only one left were these 2 lease. We only had a lease. We didn't even own it. So they had a meeting of the board of directors to decide what they should ask for the lease. You know, they got 7 years to go on the lease. So they figured it out. So it came out that a reasonable amount would have been $25,000. This was a few years ago. $25,000. So they said, with 25 no money, we'll ask $35,000. So they took it to the vote to the board of directors. They said $35,000. So they appointed the 2 chief Hungarians and me to go to the lawyer for Food Fair and tell them that this is what we want. So we're riding in the car. I remember it was such a hilarious thing. He's driving in this big Lincoln, and he said, "What do you mean $35,000?" He said, "We'll ask for 45." So the other Hungarian says, "We'll ask for 55. You know, they bid themselves up and going in the car. And so we park the car and we get in and we come there and the lawyer says to us, we didn't even sit down. He said, "Listen," he said, "you're the last 2, we got to get done with this deal." He said, "And I'm very busy today. I don't have time for you." He said, "What do you want?" So they said $75,000. So he said, "Done." Well, they died. They didn't know what to do with themselves all the way home. They couldn't get over that they said 75. They could have said 175. And it was obvious the guy was there. He wanted to get rid of the property. And whatever he had left, he was going to give you in the kitty. It made no difference to him. And this was a millions of dollar deal. And so they asked for 75. He gave them 75, right? So then I saw that was simply the ultimate revenge. Because I was ready to go back and say, "Oh, great, you told us to ask 35. We're coming back with 75. And they wouldn't even tell anybody the story. That's how embarrassed they were that they got 75 for it. So here the same thing. Chanamel, he asked the price. He says, "V'eshkel olos hakesef." I said, "Here's the check. Count it out. Shiva shkolim v'asora hakosef. 7 silver big shekels and 10 little silver coins. That's what I paid him. The price that he asked." The Gemara learns from here. The Gemara uses this as a an example of how documents were written. The Gemara in Gittin discusses this. At their time, that they brought a scribe. So the scribe was Baruch, was the Yirmiyahu's disciple who was with him in jail. And Vo'echdom, and they signed. Vo'echdom is not only signed the signature, but they put the seal. Everybody had a seal. Either they had a signet ring or they had a seal. Vo'ed Eidim, and there were 2 witnesses that we brought. The Medrash says the 2 jailers. All right? He had a minion there, always in jail. And they brought in the scales and we weighed the coins, because the coins in the ancient world were never at the face value of the coins, the way our money is, but rather were the metal itself. So if you gave old coins were worth less because they weighed less. They'd already been rubbed off by the friction of use. This is what happened, and I took the star, the book that made the kinyan, that made the arrangement. That's a chosum. The chosum was the bottom part of the star where the signatures were. HaMitzvah. And the mitzvah is they would write, the Meforshim say that they would write in the shtar the fact that it's a mitzvah to redeem your relative's property if he can't afford it, and therefore all of that would be recited in the shtar. It would be recited in the document, and it wasn't purely a money deal, but that there was another dimension to it. Ta'chukim, the laws that pertained here, all the legalisms were written. Vesagoli, and then the part of the shtar that was visible. So in the ancient world, every shtar had a part that was like folded over and not shown to anybody, and then a part that was visible that attested to the fact that the property was sold, and that was like the public record. Later on, in the time of the second Beis HaMikdash, the Gemara tells us that they had documents that were sewn together. In other words, the secret part was sewn shut, tight. And then there was like a bottom flap that was open that said what they wanted to say publicly. I gave the book to my scribe, to my servant. He was his Talmud. He was the man that kept the tradition alive, and he is the connection between Yirmiyahu and Ezra HaSofer. Ezra HaSofer was Makabel the Torah from Baruch. So Baruch was the bridge between the generation of the Churban and the generation of those who came back to Israel. Leine Chanam El Dodi, and it was in front of my cousin Chanamel, Leine Oedi Makosim B'Sefer Al-Mikna, and in front of the witnesses who had signed the document, Leine Kol HaYehudim Hayoshim B'Chatzar HaMatarah, and in front of everybody that was there. It was a public sale. In other words, there were a number of prisoners, and this was the event. Not every day in jail did somebody come and buy property. Now, in this Tanakh that I have here, which is published by Moshe Rav Kook, the Das Mikra series of Tanakh, which is one of the greatest beautiful things put out, there's a picture here. This is the seal of Baruch ben Neriah that was found. And it's in the Israel Museum. His seal, his signet ring of the disciple of the prophet Yirmiyahu. And it's fascinating to see it. And it's in the ancient Hebrew script, not in our Hebrew, but in the ancient, the old Hebrew, Ksav Ivri. And it says, Brachyahu ben Neriyahu. The word Baruch is a contraction of the word Brachyahu. Brachyahu means blessed by God. The reason they contracted it is because the last three letters, Yud and a Hey and a Vav, are letters from God's name. And many times people, when they have the letters from God's name, put an apostrophe, or they don't use the name that way. Like, that's why a lot of people named Eliyahu call themselves Eli, or they spell it that way, because of the fact that they don't want to use the God's name or spell it out completely. So that custom is here too. So his real name was Baruch Yahu, but he called himself Baruch. Baruch Leineim Leimor. And the Novi describes the scene. I commanded Baruch, saying, Kol Hashem Tzvokos Alakei Yisrael Lakoachas Asvoim Ha'ile. Take these books, these documents, meaning this record. The Sefer HaMikna Hazeh, the Sechosul, the Sefer HaGoli Hazeh, The part that is the shtar, the actual kinyan, and the part that's signed, and the part that's open, and the part that's hidden. Unesatem b'kli chores. This is the way they store documents. They put them in pottery jars. Now, the Dead Sea Scrolls, for instance, were found that way. All documents, you're not talking a time when they had book binding, or they had shelves. So if you wanted to have manuscripts, let's say you had manuscripts in your house, you had scrolls, you want to know which scroll was which. And you don't want to unroll every one, so they had these jars. And on the jar was written, or the jars were color-coded if you came from a certain part of Brooklyn, or however you wanted it. But that was the system, so that when you walked into the man's library, it was a ceramic jar, pottery place. Here, by the way, is also a picture of the jar in which the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. So that jar is 22 or 2,100 years old.
They're showing a sample of the actual purchase, the New York Public.
Yeah. So that's in the Satam Bikli Chores. That was their custom. So if you wanted to preserve a deed, if you wanted to preserve official records, you wanted to preserve a book, you did it by placing it in a jar. Laman Yamdu Yomim Rabim, so that they will be preserved for a long period of time. Now, an amazing thing. Laman Yamdu Yomim Rabim is also part of the prophetic nevuah. You know, you think you don't need this piece of paper now, right? What use is it, right? It's going to last for a long time. So the Meforshim saw in this Laman Yamdu Yomim Rabim is not only a reference to the document, but to the entire story. This story is going to last a long time. And therefore, the document is preserved, but the story is also preserved. Hashem Tzvokos, Yirmiyahu says, this did God say to me, Elokei Yisrael, the God of Israel, O Jikonu Botim V'Sodos Uchromim B'Oretz Azos. The Jewish people will yet buy houses and fields and vineyards in this land. It's not over for us. But to buy in Eretz Yisrael is a mitzvah. It's not a real estate investment. It's a mitzvah. It's a reaffirmation of the fact that it's ours. Jews always tried to buy. The Gemara says that it's mutter to buy on Shabbos from a non-Jew property in Eretz Yisrael. And the Gemara was not especially Zionistic. But that's why, that's the only faith that can make Eretz Yisrael ours. Otherwise otherwise it's useless. So that's the story. So now that everybody leaves, so sometimes it happens, that there's a conversation between, say, a husband and a wife, or between two partners or something, when the third party leaves, so then the other one says, what in the world did you say here? What did you do here? What's going on? So nobody says, what is all of this? I did what you said, right? But what is happening here? I prayed unto God.
It's 10:30
After I
p.m.
gave this document away to Baruch, and I said, Aho Hashem Elokim, behold, please, God. Aho is like, woe to me. I don't understand what you're doing here. I know, Hine ato asisa hashamayim v'soretz b'chochacho agodol v'zroacho nanatuya. I know that you can do everything, right? You've created heaven and earth, and in your outstretched hand, you have all powers. Nothing is impossible for you. I understand that. But but I don't understand it. Right? So this is the human reaction, right? After I say, God can do everything, so then I ask God, but why did you do this? Or how are you going to get yourself out of this? We find the same question that Moshe asked the Ribono Shel Olam, right? Where are you going to get enough food to feed all these people? He said, you're going to give them all meat tonight, right? Where are you going to get it, right? The butcher's closed. How are you going to feed them all? God said, Ayad Hashem Tiktzor. What? You don't think we can do it? So what, Moshe didn't believe it? If anybody saw that there are no limits to God, it was Moshe. But Moshe is still human. And the human side of the person, after saying all the exaltation of God that is possible, still thinks of God in limited terms, because since our minds are finite and we are limited, we cannot think in unlimited terms. The Rambam explains that very well. He says that that's the interpretation of the verse, Ki lo machshavosai machshavosechem, v'lo darchechem jochoi, Omer Hashem. That God, the Navi Yeshayahu says, my ways are not your ways, my words are not your words, my understanding is not your understanding. So Rambam says, what does that mean? It means that God says, listen, you're creatures, and creatures don't understand the Creator. And therefore, there's no use knocking your head against the wall. You can't do it, right? You're finite. You're limited. Can't understand it. But since we always try to understand it, so that's what the Novi's question is, right? The Novi's question is, I know that you can do everything, and I know that there's, and I know, but I don't understand what you did here. God, you are the one. This is really taken from the Aseres Hadibros, from the Ten Commandments, the words that God himself, Kaviyachal, used to describe himself. Chesed la'alofim. The Ribono Shel Olam can do chesed la'alofim. Alofim there means thousands of generations. The Ribono Shel Olam keeps the account, so that thousands of generations later, he pays. He's good. No one can understand God's cheshbonos in the world. There's a photostat that I hung up in the yeshiva of a Targum Yonason, which is in the book of Eicha, which says that the land of Edom, he says, is the land of Armenia, and that the largest city in Armenia is going to be destroyed by a great earthquake. It will be leveled, and that after that, the Messianic era will, accelerate. What do you want from me? I'm just telling you what is, what's hanging on the yeshiva bulletin. Listen, that important, on the yeshiva bulletin board is funny, because you see the human next to that great spiritual, metaphysical thing. A guy's looking for a ride Saturday night, to Brooklyn, right? So they're hanging next to each other. But it's also chesed la'alofim, right? God somehow has a different cheshbon than we do. He does chesed for thousands. U'mishalem avon avos al chet b'neihem achareim, and the sins of the fathers have an effect to the bosom of their children later. It's almost genetic. The more we know about things, the more we realize there was a time in the Western world, and the idea of secular humanism and of everybody being equal, so nothing was genetic, because that's bigoted. Nothing was genetic, everything was environmental. And now, as science discovers more and more of the truth, we see that it's 99% genetic almost. Physically, socially, mentally, it has those types of roots. However, Agodol Agibor, the great God. So the Gemara says that he didn't say Hanorah. Yirmiyahu couldn't bring himself to say Hanorah because it was the generation of the Churban. So he limited his praise of God. The Gemara says, that we couldn't say anything except Anshe Knesset Hagdolah wrote it out for us, so we parrot it, right? But when we say Adam, Akei, Lagod, Lagibor, Hanora, Akei, Lelion, we don't know what we're talking about. We just say it. Hashem Tzvoko Shmo. The Lord God, Lord of his hosts, is his name. The Gemara says that the reason you didn't say Norah was again because of the Churban, right? The Goyim are destroying the Beis HaMikdash. I cannot say on God if God let that happen. So imagine God lets that. Let's Yirmiyahu get away with it too. Yirmiyahu has a right to complain that you're not. I can't say now with a full mouth about you if you let the Jewish people be destroyed this way. God, Eitzah here means your plan, tremendous. Like we say, Tahom Rabbah, it's a great depth. No one can plumb the depths of understanding your plan of the world and of history and of people. V'rav Aliyah. The Aliyah here means great have you done. Your maisim, what you have done, your actions are enormous. No one can appreciate what you've done and what you are doing. Asher inecha pchuchos al kol darkei bnei Adam. Your eyes are open to see each and every human being. You're omniscient. You know what everyone does. Loseis liish kedrochav, and you pay every man according to his path in life, V'chifri Malalov, and the fruits of his behavior, the fruits of his actions. And the Mefarshim say it's two different things. Sometimes a person goes on a bad path, but he does a good thing. Sometimes he goes on a good path and he does a bad thing. The Rebbeinu Shalom adjusts for both. He adjusts for both. It's two different things. What's the direction of the person, and what does the person do? In Chassidus, they took this to a higher level. The Baal Shem says that in heaven a person is judged, therefore, not for what he or she is, but for what he or she aspires to be. And that has a great dimension. He asked somebody, and we never faced with the question, but what would you like to be? What do you want to be? What would you like to be remembered as? So sometimes you see it on a person's license plate, or there are other revelations in life. But that's the difference between Drochav and Ma'alolav. Drochav is where the person is headed, and Ma'alolav is what the person does. So sometimes a person is really headed in a good direction. He's a very good person, but he does a bad thing. So God will pay him for the bad thing, but since the general direction is good, that's taken into account. And sometimes a person is in the wrong direction and a bad person, and he does a bad thing, but he does a good thing, right? So the Rebbeinu Shalom rewards him for the good thing, but he takes into consideration the bad direction that is involved. Asher samto so sumosim beretz Mitzrayim ad hayom hazeh. You, the Ribono Shel Olam, who implanted your miracles in the land of Egypt, and they have lasted until today. Ad hayom hazeh, they are still present till today. Uvi Yisrael uva Adam, and that you have done miracles and made an impression upon the Jewish people uva Adam and on all peoples. And you have a reputation, the world knows of you. Atotze es Amcho es Yisrael meretz Mitzrayim ba'osos u'v'mosim u'v'yod chazoko u've'ezroa netuyo v'mora godol. And you took your people Israel out of the land of Egypt, you redeemed them, and you redeemed them in a fashion that was public. They didn't sneak out. Ba'osos with miracles, b'mosim with wonders, b'yod chazaka with a strong hand, which means the Egyptians paid the price, because sometimes the victim escapes, but the victimizer never pays. But that didn't happen. That doesn't happen in God's world. In God's world, all the accounts eventually are settled. Ezra is the word zrera, with my strong outstretched hand, which is always the symbol of God's strength and vengeance and harsh justice. Uvamora godol, and in great terror. The world, the Egyptians certainly, but the entire world stood in awe, was terrorized, was frightened by what happened. Vatitan lohem es haaretz azos asher nishbato la'avosa l'seis lahem. Not only that, now the Talmud comments on this often, that the Ravona Shalom's commitments and promises to the Jewish people are always grandiose in nature. God never has made us a small promise. He didn't say, I'll take you out of the land of Israel, I'll take you out of the land of Egypt, and you'll have, I'll give you freedom in the land of Egypt, or autonomy, or the Goyim will treat you nicely, or you won't have to be slaves, or I'll give you a place to live there. God's promises from the onset were, and I'm going to take you to the land of Israel, and the land will flow with milk and honey, and the other nations will be driven from it. And God always speaks to us in superlatives. And to a great extent, therefore, the Jewish people also believe that way, that we are not satisfied with a small reward. We're not satisfied to have a country that's another Ghana, or another Lebanon, or another Venezuela. And that's not what we're looking for. And that really goes to the heart of many of the things that we see today in the current Jewish world, is because we are not willing to settle for anything less than the grandiose promises that have been made to us and repeated to us constantly. Leseis lahem, to give them eretz zovas cholav v'dvosh, a land that flows with milk and honey. The Gemara learns always from the eretz zovas cholav v'dvosh, that's our heter, to drink milk.
It's
because milk comes from a living creature. And the halacha is that one is not allowed, for instance, Eivir min achai, they're not allowed to cut a piece of meat from a living animal and use it, to eat it. And you're not allowed to take blood from a living creature that's dam min achai. So the Gemara says, so then milk also would be forbidden to us under that category of anything that comes from a living animal. Except that since the Torah promised us a land that flows with milk and honey, the Torah would not promise us non-kosher foods. The Torah would not promise us things that we could not eat. So the Torah specifically has said that cholav is permissible. That's no milk. And dvash, the idea of dvash here of honey is always refers not to bee honey in the Chumash and Tanakh, but it refers to date honey, which you can buy in Eretz Yisrael today also. And it's much sweeter. It's a completely different honey. Much sweeter and much more viscous. It's almost solid. And that's date honey. In the Middle East, it still remains as popular honey as bee honey. But that when the Torah says a land that flows with milk and honey, that's the honey they're talking about, because bees are not necessarily the symbol of a land that's fertile and rich, whereas date honey is. Vayovohu vayirshu also. So the Jewish people came, they took you up on your offer. They came and they inherited the land. They said, okay, good, people accept presents. People accept gifts, even from God. So they came and they accepted the gifts that you offered them. They took Eretz Yisrael. V'lo shomu b'kolecha, but they didn't listen to the other half. They didn't fulfill the conditions that were attached to the gift. They did not fulfill their word. Lo shomu b'kolecha, they did not listen to your voice. Uvesoroscha lo halochu, and they did not go in your way, in your Torah. It says in Shmos, Hayelech b'torosim lo, will they follow my way or not? God says this is the test. They didn't do it. Eis kol asher tzivi salem la'aso shlo asu. Everything that you told them to do, they didn't do. And we understand from the positive side, the negative side, that everything that you told them not to do, that's what they did do, which is the perversity of the people of Israel. And now you see what happened. All of this evil has befallen them. Vatakre, it has all happened to them. Now, vatakre here is also an interesting verb that the Navi uses, because vatakre is like the Hebrew word mikre. It happened to them. They don't see it. They never see the cause and effect. They never see why it happens. So they just say it's an accident. We got caught here in the middle of the Babylonian Empire's expansion. Not our fault. We didn't do anything. When they don't realize that it's all because of them. If they would behave themselves, if they would have been, so there wouldn't have been a Babylon. The whole thing wouldn't have happened. There's a book by a Jewish writer who now lives, an American writer who now lives in Israel. Zev Chayfetz is his name. He was at one time the press secretary for Menachem Begin. So he has in that book, which is about modern day Israel, it's a very astute book, and it's funny also, because Jews are basically very funny. So one of his comments is that Israel, he said, is a good country in a very bad neighborhood. Which on the surface is a very clever statement, and it really sums up a lot of our problems. But that misses the point. The Navi said, that's not the point. You're not in a bad neighborhood. You know why you're in a bad neighborhood? Because you're not behaving yourself. So therefore, God has to remind you, right? So everybody is reminded that they're Jewish. Even they don't want to be Jewish, but they're all Jewish. Yet everybody's reminded of a lot of other things. So that's vatakreosam eskoloroazos. That's why this verb is used. They thought it's a mikra. They thought it just happened to them. But it's, I know. You've explained it to me. It's not just happening. They earned it. And now we stand at the end. Hasolalos. This was the description of the siege in the time of the Navi Yirmiyahu. So how did the attackers eventually win the siege? They poured mounds of dirt and built it up higher and higher till it was higher than the walls. And then they were able to mount the mounds and shoot across over the walls into the city. That's called solalos. Solalos is to build a mound. That's the Hebrew word today for the building company. I don't know if it's still in business, the Mapayim. Solel boneh, right? Solel means to build the mound, to excavate. So they have come to the city. They are now around the city of Yerushalayim. The Navi is in jail, and he says, the latest bulletins from the front is that they're building the mounds. And the city will be given over in the hands of the Chaldeans, of the Babylonians, who are making war upon it. Unswerving, unceasing war. And they're going to win it. Because of the situation. They are stronger. The sword. Their swords are sharper than ours. They have more men. They have a greater army. Their military is more astute. We're unable to win. And we are weakened by the hunger in the city. You see in the book of Eicha, which also was written by the Novi Yirmiyahu, he describes the horrors of the hunger in the city of Yerushalayim. Dever and the plague, the pestilence, the disease, which is always accompanies siege and war and hunger. And more people die by disease than die by the sword. V'asher dibarta hoyo. And every word that you said, God, hoyo, has come to pass. In other words, I agree with you now that there is no exaggeration, there's no hyperbole, because many times people say, oh yeah, the prophet said, but that's an exaggeration. Just as perhaps people may have at one time thought that the words of the Tochacha, of the terrible curses which appear in the Torah, are allegorical. But we know in our time that not only were they literal, they didn't say half of what happened. There are no words to describe what happened. None. So God, he says, I know what you said. Hoya. And you yourself are witness to it, God. You see it. You see the situation. Meaning, if it's clear to me, then certainly by all stretch of the imagination, by all logic, by all type of thought, it's clear to you. You're also aware of what's happening. Now comes the punchlines. Until now, this is all the preamble to the question. And you said to me, God, knowing all of this, after all of this description, after all of this destruction, and we're going down the tubes, and you said to me, go buy the field and give him full money, and do it legally, not surreptitiously, not underground. Bring witnesses, make a whole legal covenant. And the city's given over in the hands of the Kasdim. What are you doing here? How do we reconcile the two? How do we reconcile the disease and hunger and pestilence and destruction that we see with what you told me to do? Because human beings can't. They don't. Find it hard to do it. Always find it hard to reconcile what happens with what's going to happen. God answers him simply. He said, listen, you said the answer at the beginning. You don't know how. That's it. Hine ani Hashem Elokei kol basar. You know who I am, he said? I'm the God of all flesh, of all human beings. Can you imagine such a thing? That alone you can't imagine. Since everything, in order to be the God of everything, so that means I'm omniscient, right? And you're not. I know everything and you don't. So I can't explain it to you. Right? It's like taking a 4-year-old child. You don't have to be a 4-year-old child. I don't understand higher calculus. So sometimes I come into the room in the yeshiva where they teach higher calculus, and I see what's doing on the board. And I would like to know hierarchy. I just don't understand one. I don't know what, it's all gibberish to me. I have no concept of what's going on. So I'm limited in that respect. Even me. So God said to Yirmiyahu, he said, Hine ani Hashem Elokei kol basar. You put your finger on the main thrust here. I am omniscient and you're not. I'm God and you're only man. Hamimeni yipolei kol davar. Is that impossible? If I tell you to buy the field, buy the field. You don't know that your children are going to use the field yet. Don't worry. You do what I say. The city's being destroyed. Everything you say is true. How do you reconcile it? I can't explain that to you. That's beyond the human frame of reference to be able to reconcile this. So in effect, that's the message of the entire Haftorah. And that's why he sent them the man to buy the field. And that really is the solution, if there is such a word, if there is a solution to all of the horrible things in history for which we have no answers. The answer is that we have no answers. To us, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. There's no justification for it. But since we're not running the show, and it's not given over to us, so therefore we have really no choice in the matter. If we have no choice in the matter, then we have to accept it as God has given it to us. That's really the message of this Haftorah.